Hi, welcome to this webinar on the neighbourhood approach and the co-design and delivery of local action plans. I'm Jan Burkhardt. I'm the Knowledge Mobilisation Lead for Born in Bradford and former director of the JUMP programme. And I'll just introduce my colleagues. So Cami, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Cami Sadiq. I'm one of the community engagement managers for JUMP.
And Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Paul, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at Born in Bradford.
Thanks. So I'm just going to share some slides that will hopefully help to illuminate what we're talking about. Get those a bit larger. Can you see the slides okay?
Yeah.
So, as in the previous webinar on neighbourhood approach, just a quick reminder, we worked at a hyperlocal level and we brought together the local partners who could all make a difference to the work at that local level. So schools were important, community organisations, faith settings, and our local authority partners such as ward officers, parks and landscape design. And we very much put green space at the heart of what we're doing. Then was a local plan developed, which is what we're going to talk about today, and that was facilitated by a community engagement manager, and a JUMP connector worked alongside them, very much at that sort of hyperlocal level, engaging children and families. It's worth mentioning that social marketing and communications also really was kind of part of our sort of connectivity and systems working, both across all of our neighbourhoods, but also in the neighbourhoods themselves. So in this webinar, we want to talk in some detail really about the co-design process that we went through, that we spent really 5 years working on, sort of testing and learning and iteratively developing something that we feel that really is worth sharing, because it works really well. So the approach we took was having brought all of our partners together. So we've got our local action group established. We then went through a process of 3 co-design workshops to develop the local action plan. The first one was really understanding the local context and coming up with initial ideas. The second workshop was really in-depth ideas generation and prioritization. We then had a process of bringing in evidence, which Jen will talk about in a minute. And then finally, in the final workshop, we also refined and agreed the ideas for the local action plan. So starting with the first workshop, I want to just talk about some of those key mechanisms for whole systems working around physical activity that we really felt actually really made quite an impact. So in that first workshop, we wanted to build really trusted relationships, and we wanted to build the motivation of our 20 to 30 partners who are taking part in this, fairly long-term commitment, 2.5 years commitment to delivering a plan to get children and families more active in that area. And one example of that was we had an activity that we used a lot during JUMP. When we were doing introductions, we invited people to share their name, their role, and one way they enjoyed being active as a child. This very simple idea has really strong emotive effect and engages people in really their memories of playing out and of how wonderful it was as children to be active and to do sports or to play out or to ride their bikes. So it sort of builds intrinsic motivation from the beginning, and sort of also actually quite good at breaking down sort of barriers of sort of status, because everybody's talking about being a child, which is very opening. So one that we really feel we used a lot, not just in the workshops, but generally throughout the project. Then the second one was really building knowledge as well as motivation and modelling activities. And this is an active break that we've also used a lot that we wanted to share. So we asked people in pairs to share with somebody else as many of the benefits of being physically active that they can think of. And then we asked them to stand in a circle and feed back those ideas by throwing a ball around the group and each person sharing one benefit of being active and going on until you've got as many of those ideas out there. And this worked on lots of levels. The first one was it avoided us delivering a long PowerPoint in which we explain all the benefits of physical activity, which you know, are multiple, but would be very much the expert model to do it that way. So it was people really feeling empowered to share what they already knew. So it was good for building sort of confidence that people already had knowledge around physical activity. It was more fun. It was modeling physical activity, but also really putting at the heart of the first workshop, what are the benefits of physical activity? Why is it important? So that really sort of established a shared understanding that everybody agreed physical activity matters. You know, we want to commit to this project. So the second part of that workshop was really starting to think about ideas that could create the action plan. And we did this through using this kind of simple workshop idea that we asked people, first of all, to think about what are all the barriers, both to them as an individual, but also to the children and families in their community. What are the barriers to being active? And then we asked them to think about what helps us be active. What you know, what can we actually do? What can we do to be more active? And this worked on two levels. One, it started getting people really digging into, you know, what are the solutions? But also we used it as an opportunity to introduce the idea of solution-focused approaches. So we asked people to think about when they focus on all the barriers to being active, of which there were many, many ideas had come out, how did they feel? And people expressed very much that they often felt a bit demoralized, that it was very hard, it'd be difficult to make a difference. And then we asked them to focus on what helps us be active, what can we do, and asked them how they felt. And then they talked about feeling, you know, kind of like it was more energized and more motivated, and yeah, we can make a difference. So this was a nice way of introducing the idea of if we focus on what we can do, we actually have more chance of having success than if we focus on the problem. It was quite important in Bradford that we worked in this way because we have neighbourhoods with lots and lots of multiple challenges, and many of the partners have become over time quite problem focused, quite naturally really when you're dealing with all those challenges. So it helped to establish an ethos of positive solution-focused approaches. That's we're very much saying we need to acknowledge that there are these problems, but then let's focus on what we can do and move forward that way. So I'm going to just now move on to the second workshop. So this was when we really introduced a shared understanding around behaviour change approaches. So for many of our partners, they had not met this before, and it was quite new, and it can be quite academic and quite difficult sometimes to grasp. So the concept of behaviour change theory that we introduced was the COM-B model. So basically that you need capability, opportunity and motivation. They're all needed for behaviour change to occur. But instead of just sort of putting it forward as an academic kind of abstract idea, we then ask people in small groups to look at a case study of a child and look at their lives, what helps them be active, what makes it difficult for them, and then what kind of solutions, what would help, what can we do to help them be active, and then really look into that. Are we thinking of ideas that are opportunities? Are we building their motivation? Are we thinking about how we build their capability? And this workshop really actually landed very well, and I think that people got the concept that this more sophisticated way of thinking, and we help people recognize that often we just think about putting on lots of opportunities and somehow we think that's going to work. So you know, it worked really well. So in this second workshop, the other thing we really did was to really identify the actions that the group had come up with, and we'll start to get as many of those out as we could. The group then went round a different workshop, smaller groups, looking at their ideas, and they had a certain number of little dots, coloured dots, and they could go and vote on the ones that they liked. And this made the choice around the initial action plan ideas really collaborative, so everyone felt like they'd had a voice around that. So I'm going to hand over to Jen now to talk about what we did next. Over to Jen.
Thank you, Jan. So yeah, as Jan just mentioned in that second workshop, the group were really starting to think tangibly about ideas and actions and initiatives to go on that action plan. So in order to facilitate that process, we used something called the Appeasers framework. And basically that's looking at different factors, including affordability, practicability, effectiveness, acceptability, safety, equity, and sustainability. So we didn't necessarily use those words within the workshops. We said, you know, can we afford it? Can it work? Is it likely to have an effect? Will people like it? Is it safe? Is it fair? And you know, is it sustainable, or can it continue? So when the stakeholders in their groups were coming up with their initial kind of ideas that was more like blue sky thinking, what we then did was introduce this framework and asked people to really consider those ideas in relation to these questions around things like cost and likely effectiveness and that sort of thing. And that really helped the groups to think more critically about the ideas that they were suggesting, and to make kind of adaptations to them or improvements to them based on these factors. And then, as Jan said, the groups were able to go and vote on the different ideas. So then between the second workshop and the third workshop, what we did was undertook some rapid reviews of existing evidence from other areas, potentially outside of Bradford, related to those ideas. And what we did was, because in some workshops there was, you know, maybe 20 ideas, so we tend to take those with the most votes, usually around 10, maybe 12, depending on how the voting went within the particular neighbourhoods. And we completed those rapid reviews, and that involved looking at grey literature, and academic literature and evaluations and things, to try and get a sense of whether those things or whether similar things have worked before in the past, whether there's evidence that they can work to increase physical activity, and also around the appeasers factors as well. So, you know, is it safe? Is it fair? And that sort of thing. So in some of the neighbourhoods, we had a research team and researchers that completed those rapid reviews. In our commissioned leadership neighbourhoods, we tested the delivery team leading that process and conducting those rapid reviews using Google Scholar, and that did work well. So this isn't just a process that you have to have a research team working alongside you to support. So once those rapid reviews had been conducted, we then gave a RAG rating to each of the ideas. So a green was given if from the review it showed that there's lots of evidence that it will be successful or has been successful previously for increasing children's physical activity. We gave an amber either if there was mixed evidence or if there is limited evidence, so it's just not really been looked at before in the literature. And then we'll give a red if there is evidence to show that it's likely to not work or that there might be negative unintended consequences, for example, of that particular action. So then we took that RAG rating and some recommendations back to the JAGs and to the third workshop. And what the groups did within that third workshop was really look at those ratings, look at the recommendations, and start to have conversations and discussions and start to make decisions about which actions the group wanted to go on the action plans. It definitely wasn't a case of us saying, you know, you need to include the greens and you can't include the reds. This was very much about the JAG groups having the knowledge to make informed decisions. It wasn't about the jump team saying what should and shouldn't go on the action plan. So the groups really looked at those and potentially made some adaptations to some of the items based on those reviews that have been done. And by the end of the third workshop, the JAGs had a finalised for that point action plan to then take forward across the JAG meetings for the next couple of years. So I'm just going to say a little bit about our neighbourhood evaluation, which was a process evaluation. So as we've said, we had those 3 initial JAG workshops, which on this slide are called JAG 1, JAG 2 and JAG 3. But then what happened is that those JAG groups continued as meetings approximately 6 times a year for the next 2.5 years. And as part of that process, we embedded some evaluation into it. It included things like surveys and interviews, ripple effects mapping, and balanced scorecards. And that was for us to really try and understand the feasibility and acceptability of taking this approach, and also the impact of the neighbourhood approach and of the neighbourhood action plans. I'm not going to go into detail about that now, because we do have another webinar specifically about the evaluation, so you can take a look at that if you're particularly interested in that. But what I am going to just touch on a little bit is the ripple effects mapping approach that we used. And that's because it was really kind of popular within the jump action groups, and was really useful as part of the work that we did. So ripple effects mapping originated from community development work in the US in 2015. And it's really a way of understanding the wider intended and unintended impacts of a project or a programme over time. So it's really useful for projects like JUMP, where things are co-designed, they're really collaborative, and you don't know what all the, you don't know what the actions are going to be. So you don't know what those potential impacts are going to be. So it's a really helpful method to try and capture some of the action, and then also the impacts of that action over time, and not just necessarily positive impact or expected and intended impacts, but potentially some of those things that we didn't anticipate, but that could be really positive or also negative. So it is a qualitative form of evaluation, and it's focused on contribution. So it's about understanding how JUMP and the local action groups contribute to change and contribute to impact over time, not necessarily cause and effect. There'll be lots of all of the factors that are contributing to those impacts, but it's trying to understand how what this programme is doing is contributing to those changes that we're seeing. And it's a really participatory method, and we embedded it into our workshops and meetings with the JUMP action groups. So approximately every 6 months or so, we would undertake ripple effects mapping, participatory activity as part of those existing meetings, which was a really good way to kind of get engagement with it and embed it into what we're doing. But the reason why we really want to talk about it here in this webinar is the benefits that it actually has to project delivery. So whilst it is a really useful evaluation method, what we found was that, it was really helpful for facilitating that ongoing delivery of the project, and the development and delivery of the action plans within the neighbourhoods. So one of the reasons for that was that it really helped to build like motivation and empowerment amongst our action group stakeholders. And that's because everyone's there with getting a pen and writing on this timeline and capturing things that they've contributed to, what they've done and that other people have done. And it really builds up really quickly when you've got all those people contributing to it. And it really allows you to see that progress that's being made, which sometimes you can kind of forget or not realise when you're kind of just plodding away at something. And not seeing the bigger picture of how it's contributing to the whole action plan. So it can be really useful for that kind of motivation and sense of like, yeah, this is worth it, and wanting to you know, really continue with the work. And then secondly, it's really beneficial for reflecting on actually what's working well and what's working less well and planning next steps. So with part of ripple mapping, it's really mapping on, as I've said, mapping on the activities, mapping on the impacts. But then something else that you can also do as part of it is really reflectors. Where are we having really significant changes and where are we having less significant changes? Like where might we be putting in quite a lot of effort into something and not getting as much out of it, or something might take a really long time compared to other things. So it's really useful for kind of seeing that bigger picture and facilitating those reflections, I suppose, about any adaptations that the group might want to make to the action plan or to individual items, based on how they've been progressing. So now I'm going to pass over to Cami to talk about some of the key aspects of the approach in relation to the action groups.
Thank you, Jen. So as mentioned previously on this webinar, there's many different types of elements that make this approach work. Now, these are the 6 that we've identified as the key ones. During the pandemic, we tried, and as the world did, going online and seeing if that worked, and it didn't really work as well as we thought it would do. We found that the face-to-face meetings were more welcoming, they felt friendlier, and there was definitely a better way of building relationships when people were in the room together. We did continue doing some online meetings, but that was purely because it was a bit more efficient in terms of time, especially for teachers who had you know, different challenges in attending the meetings. But ultimately, the face-to-face ones were the ones that were the most successful. Within these meetings, we ensured that there was some time for networking. Now, as mentioned in previous webinars, there were groups of people that were within touching distance of each other geographically, but didn't know what the other partners were doing. So we allowed a bit of time where you could have a cup of tea or some food, and you could have time to actually network with people and get to know each other a little bit better. Following that, we also, following the meetings, we had updates, regular updates to all the partners, for those who may have not been able to attend, and those that did attend, just to give everybody an idea of what was discussed. And that was really to do these 2 other things, which is to keep everyone engaged and to also celebrate some of the things that have happened during the workshops and the jump action groups. Now, in terms of celebrating success, Jen's just mentioned the ripple effect mapping. That was a really good way of celebrating success, but there were also the small wins where people would set up a new group, or a young person would go from A to B on a journey, and they were the successes that we wanted to share as a group, so there was space to do that. And finally, as Jan mentioned earlier, looking at a solution-focused approach and really focusing on the things that people could do rather than the things that they were not able to do. Some of this is historic, and what we wanted to do is come in and almost give people the belief that they could do something, and whatever they do, whether it worked or not, would have some sort of learning or would have some sort of benefit to the community. So in terms of the key ingredients for the delivery of the action plan, we had regular meetings, so we ensured that we met every term. We had meetings with schools, within schools. We had meetings with community centres, inside community centres. So we ensured that we kind of had some equity in terms of spreading that out amongst the whole community, so everybody felt engaged and that they could attend at least 2 or 3 meetings a year. As well as them, we also quarterly had community of learning events. That's where we brought everybody together. So that was from across neighbourhoods. And that was really a time for us to reflect on some of the successes that have happened, some of the things that we could improve on. It was a time for sharing good practice. But it was there were always events that were feel-good events to get people together and to continue that feeling of motivation to continue this work. As well as the regular things that we were doing practically, there was a lot of kind of evaluation and process evaluation that was mentioned earlier. So we did balanced scorecards and ripple maps to ensure that everything that was happening on the ground was actually being captured, and we could take learning from that. Each of the action plans were RAG rated, which meant that there was a focus on ensuring things would get done. So we continued to follow all the actions and ensure that there wasn't any slippage on timings. If there were any problems, we could identify them problems and rectify them, and just to make sure that people were on track. And finally, and this is probably not the most important thing, is what we found is actually resource and funding helps, and it's one of the key ingredients. But I think ultimately people's motivation within communities to deliver an action plan that's going to change the lives of children, young people, and their families was the ultimate motivation. But to get certain things done, to get certain projects done, there was a need to access resources. So we ensured within the delivery of the action plan that either we had some resource or we could pull resource from other sources of funding.
Thanks, Cami. That's great. Really, really great to hear. Just to sort of kind of round up, there was 2 years of delivery of the action plan, and then in that final phase, we had this 6-month embed and sustain phase. We really looked at sustainability from the very beginning to try and hard to bake it in, oven bake it in from the very beginning. So this behaviour change approach was part of that. Building the capability of local people and organisations, sort of lots of workforce development, lots of training, so we're leaving those skills behind for the long term. And then the other thing was encouraging sharing skills and resources across the group. There were people with, physical resources like space, there were people with like equipment, and we actually really encouraged people to almost autonomously look at how they can share for the long term, with some big successes in some areas around that. In the embedded sustain phase, we were really focused on building that capability of the organisations to be involved to keep going. And some of that was about building skills around applying for funding. But alongside that, we want to make sure that we really also celebrated success, as Cami said. We are in a lucky position to be able to have a phase of deepening the work in Bradford, and for that we're looking at developing an ongoing universal offer across the district. We just worked in one smaller area of the district with about 30,000 children. We're now looking at district-wide, and that universal offer was something that we started to share with partners in the embed and sustain phase, so they can see that sort of light touch support going forward longer term. And we asked partners to kind of pledge their ongoing commitment to the work. I think it's worth saying that this focus for JUMP was on children and young people, but I think that a lot of the local action group work, the co-design workshop, this way of working could work with an all-age approach as well, and certainly children live in families which are part of all ages in a family. So we didn't get a chance to explore that approach, but it's something that we feel has got real potential and real promise. I'm just going to hand over to Jen to sort of summarise really our learning around the benefits of the co-design approach. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So this is just some of the key learning that's coming out of our process evaluation that I mentioned earlier. So in terms of that co-design approach, we've found that it's really fundamental really to developing that shared understanding for partners across the system for the importance of physical activity. Through, I suppose, people being directly involved in shaping an action plan, it's so much more powerful than kind of being told that physical activity is good for you and this is what you need to do. It's also really helped gain buy-in across different levels and parts of the system. So by giving people an opportunity to contribute to shaping the programme within the different neighbourhoods and within their neighbourhoods has really helped to kind of foster that engagement and buy-in. And linked to that, it's really fostering that shared responsibility. When you've contributed to developing something and you have responsibility for delivering it, then it really does build that kind of sense of ownership, more so than if you know, a pre-designed plan had been brought in and people were asked to help deliver. And then as we've mentioned throughout really, that co-design process does help to build that connectivity and collaboration for the long term. So people are collaborating, sharing ideas, and then also thinking about how they can work together in order to deliver not just this action plan, but longer term kind of goals and outcomes as well. And then embedding that evidence-based approach has been really key to the success of the co-design approach really, and our ongoing kind of learning and improvement of what we're doing. So through embedding things like the COM-B model, through embedding the rapid reviews, and through taking a reflective approach, is really facilitating the success and the sustainability of what we're doing within the neighbourhoods. So that's it for us for this webinar that's focused on the neighbourhood approach and in particular the co-design workshops. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.